Roosevelt inherited the office. He wasn't elected. You have to understand that Roosevelt had no mandate, but he manufactured one. He had a vision of the presidency.
Before Theodore Roosevelt became the youngest president in American history, before Mount Rushmore carried his face, and before he was celebrated as a fearless warrior, he was a sickly child who was once told by doctors that he would not live a full life. He suffered from severe asthma, could barely breathe at night, and was so physically weak that he often had to be carried. Instead of accepting that fate, Roosevelt made a quiet, radical decision as a boy. He would build his body and his will stronger than his limitations. That private promise, made in pain and desperation, would eventually reshape the American presidency and the modern world. This video explores how Theodore Roosevelt, aka Teddy, transformed himself from a frail, overlooked child into one of the most influential leaders in U.S. history. It traces the defining moments that forged his character, the personal tragedies that hardened his resolve, and the bold decisions that permanently altered America's role on the global stage. From the Rough Riders to the White House, from conservation crusades to political battles that nearly destroyed him, this is not just the story of a president. It is the story of relentless reinvention. Watch until the end to understand why Roosevelt's greatest legacy wasn't his power, his wars, or his speeches, but his belief that struggle itself is the source of greatness. A lesson that remains as urgent today as it was more than a century ago. Theodore Roosevelt was born on October 27, 1858, in New York City, into a wealthy family whose comfort sharply contrasted with the frailty of their second son. From early childhood, Roosevelt suffered from severe asthma that left him gasping for air, often in the middle of the night. Doctors warned his parents that he was physically weak and urged him to avoid exertion. For a boy living in the booming, industrializing heart of America, this prognosis could have meant a lifetime of limitation. Confined indoors for long periods, Roosevelt filled his days with books, journals, and specimens. He became fascinated with animals, nature, and the wider world he could not yet physically explore. But what truly set him apart was his response to weakness. Rather than surrender to it, Roosevelt internalized a different philosophy, one encouraged by his father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., whom he idolized. His father impressed upon him the idea that strength was not merely inherited, but built. Under that guidance, Roosevelt began a punishing regimen of exercise, including boxing and weightlifting, transforming his body through sheer determination. This battle against frailty shaped Roosevelt's worldview. He came to believe that hardship was not an obstacle of greatness, but its source. Physical weakness, fear, and suffering were challenges meant to be confronted head-on. Roosevelt entered Harvard College with a reputation as an energetic and intellectually curious student. He excelled academically while continuing his obsession with physical conditioning. After graduating with honors in 1880, he married Alice Hathaway Lee, a woman he deeply adored, and briefly enrolled at Columbia Law School. But the law bored him. Roosevelt was drawn to action, not theory, and soon abandoned legal studies for public service. At just 23 years old, Roosevelt was elected to the New York State Assembly, making him one of the youngest legislators in state history. There, he quickly gained a reputation as an independent reformer, openly challenging corruption and party machines. His rapid rise suggested a bright future, until his personal life collapsed. On February 14, 1884, tragedy struck with devastating force. Roosevelt's mother and his wife both died within hours of each other in the same house. Grief overwhelmed him. In his diary, he recorded only a single line: "The light has gone out of my life." Unable to remain in New York, Roosevelt fled west to the Dakota Territory. On the frontier, Roosevelt lived a harsh, dangerous life as a cattle rancher, hunter, and sometime lawman. He endured brutal winters, financial loss, and isolation. Yet it was here, far from politics and society, that Roosevelt rebuilt himself. The frontier hardened his character, deepened his resilience, and reinforced his belief that adversity was essential to personal growth. When he eventually returned east, he was no longer merely an ambitious politician. He was a man forged by loss and survival. Back in New York, Roosevelt resumed public life with renewed intensity. He served in a series of reform-minded roles, including Civil Service Commissioner and Police Commissioner of New York City, where he aggressively targeted corruption. His reputation as a tireless reformer eventually led to his appointment as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. When war broke out between the United States and Spain in 1898, Roosevelt saw an opportunity to test his beliefs about courage and leadership. Resigning his post, he helped organize the first U.S. volunteer cavalry, known as the Rough Riders. The unit was an eclectic mix of cowboys, Ivy League athletes, and adventurers. In Cuba, Roosevelt led them in a daring uphill charge during the Battle of San Juan Heights. The charge became legendary. Roosevelt's visibility and fearlessness turned him into a national symbol of bravery almost overnight. Returning home as a war hero, he was elected governor of New York. In office, he continued his reform agenda, confronting powerful corporate interests and party bosses alike. His independence alarmed Republican leaders, who sought to remove him from state politics by elevating him to the vice presidency. It was a calculated move meant to neutralize him. Instead, it positioned him for a historical moment. In September of 1901, President William McKinley was assassinated. Theodore Roosevelt, just 42 years old, was sworn in as president, the youngest in American history. From the moment he took office, Roosevelt redefined the presidency as an active, forceful institution. Domestically, Roosevelt believed the government had a responsibility to mediate between competing interests. He aggressively enforced antitrust laws, targeting monopolies that threatened economic fairness. His Square Deal program aimed to balance the needs of workers, consumers, and businesses. He intervened in labor disputes, strengthened consumer protections, and expanded federal oversight of industry. Roosevelt's passion for conservation was equally transformative. He viewed America's natural resources as a national inheritance that must be preserved. During his presidency, he protected nearly 200 million acres of land, more than all previous presidents combined. National forests, wildlife refuges, and monuments were established under his leadership, permanently reshaping the American landscape. On the international stage, Roosevelt believed the United States must emerge as a global power. His approach to foreign policy was summarized in his famous principle: speak softly, but carry a big stick. He expanded the Navy, sent the Great White Fleet on a global tour, and asserted American influence in the Western Hemisphere. His role in facilitating the construction of the Panama Canal dramatically altered global trade and naval strategy. Roosevelt also demonstrated diplomatic skill by mediating the Russo-Japanese War, an effort that earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. Yet his global vision was not without controversy. His belief in American authority and racial hierarchy shaped policies that continue to be debated today. Leaving office in 1909, Roosevelt refused to fade quietly into retirement. He embarked on an African safari, collected specimens for scientific study, and toured Europe as an international celebrity. But his absence from politics was brief. Disillusioned with his successor's retreat from reform, Roosevelt returned to the political arena. In 1912, he launched a third-party presidential campaign under the Progressive, or Bull Moose Party. The campaign electrified the nation. During one speech, Roosevelt was shot in the chest by an assassin. Remarkably, he completed the speech before seeking medical attention. Though he lost the election, his campaign reshaped American political discourse and influenced reforms for years to come. Roosevelt remained outspoken during World War I, urging American involvement. All four of his sons served in the war. The death of his youngest son, Quinton, devastated him. His health declined rapidly afterward. On January 6, 1919, Theodore Roosevelt died in his sleep at the age of 60. Roosevelt's legacy is vast and complex. He reshaped the presidency, challenged corporate power, preserved America's natural heritage, and asserted the nation's role on the world stage. He was also a man of contradictions, progressive in some beliefs, deeply flawed in others. Yet his central message endures, that greatness is not inherited, but forged through struggle, discipline, and relentless action.